Hi, I'm Oliver, one of the co-founders at SACLÄB, and today I brought you two Kelly 28s. One is authentic, one isn't, and I'd like to show you how we determine the authenticity and showing you the differences in two bags. Follow me. So, let's look at both bags that we brought today. We have brought two Kelly 28 handbags, and as I mentioned earlier, one is real, one isn't. So these are the two Kellys 28 that I brought, and now it's a little bit for you to see which one would you guess is authentic and which one isn't. Can you already see it? Which one is it and which one isn't it? The black one is authentic and the other one is a counterfeit. This one is what we would call probably something like a very good super fake. Let's look at the hardware of the bag first. So this hardware, this gold-plated hardware, here we have palladium hardware. This one seems to be unworn. It is still with a protective foil. This one also on some parts still has protective foil. I think it was inside where I saw that. But there's something that's quite interesting when it comes to the hardware. The hardware over here has a lot sharper edges than the hardware that it has over here. The MS hardware is typically slightly rounded up. One difference that you also can notice is the rivets on this bag over here. They're much smaller, much pointier, and MS usually doesn't use these small pointy items. And it's something that obviously in general I think is quite easy to compare if you have an original right next to you. If you don't have one, that's very tricky to compare. One other detail is, if we look at it a bit closer, is the engraving of the MS. The engraving of MS over here is slightly smaller than it is on this side. Again, it's something that you basically need to have a comparable item to look, otherwise it might fool you if you just receive the bag like this at home. One notice that we had is the size and the feeling of the rings where we put our shoulder strap on is completely different. It's just something that I feel if I use my finger, just putting it on top here, you can just feel that the angle is just not matching. And this one is thinner compared to this one. If we look at the feet on this item, they look almost identical, because on the top of the feet goes like this. So that's the shape. And that is happening at the original MS bag as well, but just a little bit smaller. So it's not very prominent visible, while here you can see it very clearly that this shape is going to go up. Let's look a little bit closer at the leather of the handbag. So for the leather, what I often do is I use the back side of my hand and just go over like this to get a feeling. Why do I use the back side of the hand? Because it's a very sensible part of the hand and it gives you a good identification of the leather. And looking at this bag, it actually has this plasticky feeling. It doesn't feel complete like leather. Next thing that I'm going to do is have a smell on the bag. This bag actually identifies it very strongly as a counterfeit item, because the smell is so chemically, with glue, plasticky. MS would not sell these items like this. So like, if you have the leather feeling and the smell, it basically gives it away directly. And you don't need to look any further. If you smell a brand new handbag from MS, it barely has any smell at all. It should not smell like leather. It should not smell like glue or any plastic chemicals. MS has a very subtle odor that comes with very freshly new bags. This odor leaves after maybe 2 or 3 months once you have the bag, but it's a very, very subtle thing. It's something none of the counterfeiters so far has replicated, in my opinion. I have not seen it like that. Let's look at next thing, at the stitchings. So the stitchings, obviously over here you have a reverse stitching, so you have a white highlight stitching, and on the black Kelly you have obviously a black stitching. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but we're gonna get some detailed shots into it, and ideally we can also see a little bit of this. If you look at the pattern of the stitching, you can also see that it's a handmade stitching, like the one at Hermès handbag. So this one is a very high quality produced item, stitched by hand, using almost the same threads. So the threads are not really something that would give it directly away. At least it's very hard to tell, to be honest. What it gives away is the edges of the leather. The edges of the leather are usually sealed with a little coating, and that little coating over here is first not matching the exact color that a gold coating should have. So the gold coating is very slightly darker, and on the other side it's also not showing to be very handmade. So like this seems to be like machine made. It's not completely uneven. If you look at the authentic one, it gets a little bit more uneven because it's made by an artisan using their bare hands and obviously an instrument to seal the edges of the leather. This is here not the case. Here it looks very much machine made and it's too perfect. In my opinion, that's something that would also give it away. If we compare the inside of the rivets again, you will also find a differentiation between the authentic and the real one. Not as much as you can see it from the outside, because on the outside this is just not fitting right. It's just too small and too pointy. On the back side you can notice that this one is slightly bigger than the original ones. Let's look at the logo. The logo of both handbags feature the Hermès Paris Made in France logo that is typical for Hermès. But this one doesn't seem to be very well made. It's more embossed into the leather. So you feel, if you take your finger around it, you feel the writing here. And that shouldn't be the case. If you go over here, you don't feel that there's anything written here. Also here, if we can compare the edges of the leather here compared to this is much thicker, this is much less quality, too perfect. And it's something that Hermès would not feature like this. Also understanding that the way how Hermès has these edges sealed is with a tool that leaves underneath the edge on the inside a little tiny line. Not many people know about that, but that's also something that is here present, but it's not here. So that's something that is also very noticeable. If looking on the inside of the bag, this bag is supposed to be also having the chèvre coating on the inside, such as the original has. There's also the chèvre leather inside, but here the chèvre leather again feels a little bit more plasticky. It feels as both leather parts are partially glued together, and that's also not something that Hermès would feature. If it comes to the format and just feeling the inside, you will notice that this one is one even surface, whereas the gold one seems to have kind of an inlay, especially towards the edges. The leather becomes flatter and not as thick anymore as it's in the middle part, so it seems to have an inlay between the two leather parts on the outside and on the inside. Something that's a red flag. The next, what we're gonna look at is the year stamp. So we have a year stamp. This one is apparently from the year 2021. It's featured here. The position of the year stamp is right. That's not the issue, but the font of the stamp is different to the font that Hermès is actually using. It usually is quite easy to read, so quite visibly read. It sometimes is a little bit more blurry. That's not something that necessarily says it's a counterfeit item, but the font of the stamp should be the same. Let's look at the shape of this handbag. Apparently from the first view, they look almost identical. But what you can see on here, the flap on top is too edgy. It's also something that Hermès doesn't really do that much. If we look a little bit more closer, we can see that the handle over here also seems to sink a little bit into the main body part of the leather, which is not very nicely done. And something that is easily notable on the handles is that this handle here is much thicker than this handle. So if you look at it at a bit closer range, you will see that this distance is also a bit different. As we were speaking before, also the handle is a bit different. The handle over here is much slimmer than it is over here. And if we measure this part, it gives the idea that the handle on the other side, on the fake back, is 1/3 slimmer than this one. So that's also something that gives it away. That doesn't happen at MS. Like the handles are also having the same construction as the bag, because it will determine a little bit the shape and the outlook of the handbag. So MS is very strict about how they're going to present the item and that it's brand-like. So let's have a look at the accessories that come with the bag. Obviously they both arrive with a shoulder strap, typically for the Hermès Kelly bag, and a lock and a clochette and 2 keys. If we look in more detail to this, especially with the lock and the keys, it's usually something that's quite easy of a telltale if a bag is authentic or if it's not. The leather that is used for this strap and also for the bag itself is a bit too stiff. The leather is much more softer an original one, and it's not so stiff and bendy. I have the feeling that the stiffness comes also as a result from this very thick layer of coating on the edges. That's something that I would say it's a sign that this is not authentic. The locks itself have an engraving on top. They have a little number underneath the engraving of the MS written code, and then they have another number on the bottom that shows and corresponds with the number that's written onto the keys. The latest MS locks, they are very fine and high quality engravings compared to the counterfeit one that is a bit more, I'd say with not high quality. It's just pressured into the metal. It doesn't look good. If I weigh both locks, I can tell you that the locks have a different weight. We usually use weights over here in our workshop in order to determine authenticity. So if you put 2 different locks on the weight, they should have roughly the same weight. But I know already we have done this before this video, this one they haven't. So you can see the length of the shoulder strap is a little bit different. The fake one is apparently a little bit longer than the other one, around 3 centimeters to 1 inch, I'd say, longer. And that shouldn't happen. MS has different sizes of shoulder straps, yet they are usually only for special order items. So you can have a shorter shoulder strap, you can have a mini Kelly, for instance, with a super long shoulder strap, 115 centimeters, I think is the longest. But they come on default in one length if you have a very standardized Kelly handbag. So now we look at the accessories that come with the bag. So we have a box, we have a dust bag typically, and both are also indications if the bag is authentic or not. Again, why would someone put an authentic item into a fake handbag or a fake box? Something that I would highly question. Obviously, if we have something like this and we identify one of the accessories as fake, we then check very closely on the bag because we feel this is like a story that doesn't add up. If we look at the dust bags first, the dust bags over here, this is the authentic one, this is the fake one. Again, this is the black Kelly, this is the gold Kelly. We can see quite clearly that the pattern of this is different. The color also is different. The color is, I think, a quite obvious sign that one thing is authentic and the other one is not. Also, the print itself is a little bit different. Now, MS has different dust bags. They have different printings on them, right? It hasn't changed. It's not always the same thing. But what you can often rely on is that the print of the authentic dust bag is basically flawless. Also, if we look at the structure of the material, The original one is much clearer, it's a clear gray, while this one has a yellowish tint underneath it, and that's also something that not happens to the dust bag usually. If we look at the boxes, the first thing we notice is that the height inside is not completely even. And then if we look at the brown edges on the front, we notice that the fake one is much more glossy than the original one. Now again, taking off the gloves, feeling the surface of the box, this one is much more structured. It feels like there is substance here. This one is not structured at all. You don't get the same even feeling if you take your hand and go over it. Looking at the Hermès logo, the Hermès logo even shows a different font and a different spacing compared to the original box. This spacing is much wider, the font is much thinner than the original one. The next thing I'd like to show you is, here both bags have a black light stamp, which is common for Hermès boxes. We use a black light to identify the stamps on the boxes, and what you can see if we use the black light is you will see this tiny logo all over the boxes again and again. However, here, this one is cheaply made. You can see the black light stamps even without the black light, and that's something that would never happen to Hermès boxes. So now you've learned a couple of valid points to identify a real versus a fake. Again, something I said in the beginning, it's very hard to determine this if you don't have a comparable counterpart. If you don't have that in your home, it's very hard to do so. But we are here to help you. So you can easily shop this bag on our website, but obviously you can't shop that bag. And I invite you to leave your comments, ask questions, and yeah, have a look for the very nice Black Kelly 28 if it's still available at SACLÄB.com.